Hi guys, this is Kimidori Cosplay, and I am back with another video. Thanks so much for the great feedback on the first one. This time I thought I would focus on a very specific element of a garment, and recently I've been getting a lot of questions about how to do sleeves. Sleeves are something that I myself am still trying to figure out, so I'm not the best at them. But it just so happens I'm currently working on Atlanta from the game Fate Grand Order. And any Type Moon fans out there, I hope you're excited, as I am. And it just so happens that her costume has puffed sleeves, and so I thought what I would do is sort of film how I'm about to go about doing it, and hopefully it could be sort of a useful reference for some of you. So let's get started. So for this project, I'm using two store-bought patterns. This is what I have so far of the torso. I'm using Simplicity's 1715 pattern, which is from the Amazing Fit series. This is the same pattern that I featured in Kagamine Rin's tutorial from my last video. And then I'm using Butterick 6630's puffed sleeve patterns. There's two layers involved in puffed sleeves. The first one is the sleeve stay, which is the underlayer, and then the sleeve itself, which is the top layer. I'm going to start with the sleeve stay, which is the underlayer that is fairly form-fitted to your shoulder. I'm transferring the pleat markings that the pattern calls for first. And then I'm going to transfer the placement markings. There should be one in the dead center along the top edge, and then two on the side, also along the top edge. Put the pleats in along the top edge and just pin them down for now. For the sleeve itself, there are 5 placement markers that need to get transferred, 3 along the top edge, 2 along the bottom edge. Ignoring the marking in the dead center, what you're going to do is sew a gathering stitch between the markings on the ends. So now we're going to start by gathering. What I'm showing here first is normal sew all thread. What I like to use instead is upholstery thread, which is significantly stronger and will not snap while you're pulling the fabric together. Make sure you set your stitch length to the longest possible option so that it's really easy to gather. Once you've sewn all your gathering stitches, make sure you switch out to regular thread on your bobbin. With that, fold your sleeve in half with the right sides together, match up the notches, and sew along the side seam. Moving on to the sleeve stay, sew an arc really close to the edge along the top to keep the pleats down. And like the sleeve, fold the sleeve stay in half and sew along the side seam. So here's my two prep pieces. The sleeve stay is inside out and the sleeve is right side out. I'm going to put the sleeve stay inside the sleeve and then start matching up the notches first when I start pinning. Then I start matching up the placement markers that we drew back in the first few stages. Remember that there's 3 pairs of markers that need to be matched. The whole point of these placement markers is so that you can distribute the gathers evenly throughout the edge. Now you can start pulling the upholstery thread so that you can gather the edge of the sleeve piece so that it fits the sleeve stay. Once the gathered edge matches the sleeve stay, you can go ahead and pin that edge down. Make sure you pin along the edge of the entire armhole. Here I'm matching up the side seam to the side seam. Now you're going to do the same thing to the bottom edge. I start off by matching up the side seam to side seam, and then I match up the notches. As before, pull on the upholstery thread and gather the bottom edge of the sleeve until the two edges match. Once the two layers are pinned down properly, it should look something like this. Now you can sew a permanent stitch along the armhole edge and the bottom of the sleeve edge. Once stitched, use the seam ripper to carefully pull out the upholstery threads. At this stage, I like to serge along the two raw edges. To make the cuff, I first measure the diameter of the bottom of the sleeve. Cut a rectangle of that same width plus 1 inch for seam allowance, and then adhere phasable interfacing just on half of it. So then I take the cuff and sew it into a tube. I also fold the bottom edge 1/2 inch up and then iron it down. And I pin the cuff to the bottom edge of the sleeve on the outside. Once you've sewed the cuff, you can either trim off the seam allowance or just cut notches as I did. Now you can pull the cuff down and then fold it in half as shown. I flipped the sleeve inside out so that I have direct access to the unsewn edge of the cuff. I'm basically hiding the seam allowance with the cuff, and then we're going to be hand sewing it down. But as always, I don't start sewing until I have everything pinned. The stitch that I'm using here is called the ladder stitch, and it makes it so that the seam is invisible. So here's how the sleeve looks once it's all assembled. As you can see, everything generally looks pretty polished and there's no raw edges showing. So to attach the sleeve to the torso, I have to put the right sides together. So if the sleeve is right side out, then you might have to turn the garment or the torso inside out. I first start by matching up the side seams and putting a pin there. And I match the opposite point of the sleeve hole to the shoulder seam and put a pin there as well. From here, I just do the best I can, matching up the edges of the sleeve and the torso, and then putting pins as I go. Here I noticed that the sleeve hole on the torso was a little bit baggy, so I put a tiny pleat there and then put a pin down. This is just an outcome of using two different brands of store-bought patterns, but a pleat that small generally is not that noticeable. I actually ended up having to put two small pleats, one on either side of the side seam, but in the end it was not noticeable at all. All that's left then is to sew along the pinned edge, and if you'd like, you can serge along this edge as well.